everyone, today I'm going to demonstrate how to curve the busk of your corset for a more deliberately dished or rounded front. So here's a long line corset and I'm going to demonstrate a few different types of curves on it. The first curve will make it resemble more of a spoon busk, so it will help kind of wrap around and slightly underneath a full lower tummy and helps pull it back up and in. I'm also going to demonstrate how to gently curve in just the lowest tip of the busk here so that it's a little bit less conspicuous under clothing. Of course, the shape of the bottom edge of the corset also matters, like I mentioned in my stealthing corsets video. But I'll demonstrate how to curve this part if there's enough length at below the lowest bracket of the busk here, so that's a little bit less noticeable. And for those of you who prefer the look of a dished front corset, when you turn to the profile where the waist literally goes inwards a little bit, I can help you make that curve in the middle of the busk as well. And then lastly, I'll teach you how to curve out the very top edge of the busk for those who might have a sensitive sternum, so that the top of the busk will put less pressure on your diaphragm or not poke into your solar plexus area. First, I'm going to answer a few frequently asked questions about curving the busk, and the first one is, do you absolutely have to bend the busk? And my answer is not at all. I curve almost none of my busks. I'm just doing it on this one as a demonstration for you. I do have many busks that are pre-curved and a few that I have experimented with curving myself just for the experience, but most of the time I prefer having a flat-fronted corset. So if your corset already gives you great abdominal support, it gives you good posture, you're comfortable in it, and you like the look of the profile, feel free to keep your corset as is. You have absolutely no obligation to bend the busk. And for those of you who might be a bit nervous about bending the busk, some have PM'd me and asked, is it possible to buy a corset with a pre-curved busk? And very rarely do off-the-rack corsets, like this isn't off-the-rack, this is from Timeless Trends, very rarely do any off-the-rack corset companies sell corsets that are already sold with a curved busk. Busks are manufactured to be straight, and then sometimes, spoon busks are curved or pressed after the fact to give their characteristic shape. What Katie did used to sell spoon busk Morticia corsets before they decided to discontinue them, and then I think Corset Story sold quasi spoon busks. They were wider at the bottom compared to the top, but they were not curved the way that a spoon busk normally is. It was just flat. So usually if you want a corset to come with a busk pre-curved, you will need to go custom and specifically ask the corset maker to curve the front for you. So if you do want to go the custom route, some corseteers I know for certain will curve the front busk for you if you ask them. Includes C&S Constructions. They're arguably the most well-known for their very dished fronts. Puimond, Corsetry and Romance, Lovely Rats Corsetry, Tighter Corsets, Jupiter Moon 3, Romanticy, and Zandriana. And I'm sure there are many more, but those are the ones that I can think of right now. But when you can't afford to go custom and your only option is off the rack, in pretty much all off the rack corsets today, the busk will come straight. One thing I gotta say, if you do choose to curve the busk yourself, just a disclaimer, it does mean that you are deliberately manipulating the corset. So this will in all likelihood render any warranties or return policies void. They will not accept the corset. It's no longer saleable to them. So before you bend the busk, be sure that you're going to keep the corset and not send it back. Yeah, so just respect the brand and the shop policies. So now let's get on to the actual how to bend the busk here. And you have the option of bending each side separately or bending both sides of the busk together. And I've been asked, which way do I personally prefer? If your corset has a boned underbusk, so that means that this modesty placket contains an extra wide bone, usually a stainless steel bone, and it's only usually under one side of the busk. I would first manipulate the side with the underbusk, and then I would put the busk together and see if curving it the other side would even be necessary or not, because sometimes if you have a really flexible standard width busk, it'll just kind of curve to the will of the stainless steel underbusk, and you don't really have to do anything about it. Keeping one side of the busk flexible also sometimes helps you to do up the busk if it's a little bit tricky. It depends on the brand and it depends on the person, but sometimes people have a harder time doing up the stiffer busks compared to a more flexible busk. In other situations, I know that some people bend their busks clasped closed to make sure that both sides of the busk are getting the exact same amount of curve. It really kind of depends on the corset and the situation, and especially how strong your hands are. There are busks like this one is pretty stiff because it has also a flat steel bone adjacent to it. And then there are other brands where Orchard Corset appears to use a standard width busk, but their busks are actually quite rigid. They're a bit more rigid than your other flexible standard width busks that some other brands use. And then some are very, very flexible. So for the brands that have extremely flexible busks, if you're comfortable, you can curve both sides of the bust together. In this situation, I think it might be easiest to show you one side at a time, but you do have to kind of continually put the busk together, like curve both sides of the busk, put them together and make sure that they're matching up. And if you end up curving one side of the busk more than the other, that runs the risk of your loops and pins not quite matching up, and it gives you trouble when you try to do up your corset. So if you do choose to bend one side of the busk and then the other, make sure that you are bending like the exact same parts of the busk. Make sure that matches up perfectly, and then move on to the next section of the busk if you choose to do it that way. So when you are bending the busk, you want to kind of focus more on in between the brackets, like in between like where the loops and pins are, where you have mostly just the steel bone. Because right here where you have the loop and pin, they have holes punched into the busk, and these are riveted in. So if those holes actually stretch in some way, the pin can fall out, or the bone can actually weaken there and it can end up snapping in that area. So you want to concentrate more of the curve like in between each bracket or loop and pin. So I mean, you don't want to make it like geometrically bent in between each loop and pin, but you want the majority of the curve to occur in between those loops and pins and not right at them. And when curving the bust, kind of feel and see if any of the other bones near the front are spiral or flat steel. Because if they are flat steel, you could even curve these second sets of bones a little bit to help curve underneath the lower tummy a little bit even more. But as you can see, like these are obviously spirals, so they're going to do what they want anyway. If your hands are too weak to curve the busk on your own, you can use the curve of your knee or your thigh, or you can use a tailor's hand like this, or you can put it over a bit of a more rigid surface, but I would use extreme caution. If you have a countertop that has a bit of a rounded lip on it, as opposed to a really strict 90-degree corner, that would be a lot better, because that would influence more of a curve and less of an actual like kink or a bend in it. So that would definitely be the wiser option. Or go for something padded. I think when Tighter Corsets bends her busks, she uses her ironing board, so it's got some padding on it, and that can help combat some of the rigid edges on the table itself. If you did give your busk too much of a curve and you need to straighten it a little bit, again, do it very gently and try to bend it back in the same place as it was before, so you don't end up getting like a ziggly busk. And try not to kind of bend it back and forth continually, because bending it too much one way and then the other is going to weaken the steel, and then your busk is under risk of breaking under stress. Another question is, what if your corset has a carbon fiber bones, not steel bones, in the front adjacent to the busk? Now, you don't have to worry about this with any off-the-rack corsets. Carbon fiber bones will only be used in a special order in a custom corset. Like most corset makers will not even include that as a standard. You actually have to request that sort of thing. So if you ordered your corset with carbon fiber bones, don't even bother trying to bend it. It will be too stiff to try to manipulate significantly with your hands. And carbon fiber is designed to be very strong, and it does have a little bit of flex, but relatively speaking, relative to steel, it is actually a little bit brittle, and rather than holding a curve, poor quality carbon fiber would rather shatter. Now, I have tried the bones from Vena Cava Design, and they are very strong, and I really don't think they have any risk of shattering, as long as you are, putting your corset under normal use and not putting it under some sort of like pneumatic like hammer or something. But coming back to the main point, if you want a curve to the front of your corset, you will have to remove any carbon fiber bones and replace them with steel. Because the carbon fiber bones that you can buy today for corsetry, they just come straight. You cannot buy them in any sort of curve. They will not hold a curve. So you will just have to replace them with normal steel bones. There's also the question of extra wide, heavy-duty stainless steel busks, and also spoon busks that came maybe a little bit too flat. And these are more tricky to bend, but it is possible to bend them. I've seen it done. I think tighter corsets had successfully bent these types of bones, and those were powder-coated bones from narrowed visions as well. So very good quality bones. And of course, flexible standard width busks like these ones are relatively easier to bend. So the first example is for those who have a panniculus, which is the medical term for loose skin on the lower tummy. So you might have lower tummy pooch, a mother's apron. Some people refer to it as a fupa. So if you want a more convex curve at the lower tummy area, this is usually going to be below the waist and even below the belly button. So where your waist tape is here, my belly button is usually about 1.5 inches below that. So from the belly button down, like this is where most of the curve would occur on me. Now, if your waist is higher or lower than mine, or depending on how much pooch you have and how long your corset is, you might need to curve it a little more or less. So, use your judgment. So like I said, I want to support the rivets here. I want to put most of the curve in between those pins. So I'm putting pressure using my thumbs on the busk here. And if this amount of leverage is not sufficient to curve the busk for you, what you can also do is take this part of your hand. It's kind of hard to show on video. This part of your hand right here, and place it in between the two pins, or loops if you're doing the other side. And then take the flat part of your other hand here and kind of curve it like that. And again, a little bit at a time, and then stop and take a look. So if I put both sides of the bust together, just kind of at the waistline here, you might be able to see that this side of the corset is just a little bit curved near the bottom, and this side is not. So we need to do the other side to match this side. So now that I bent the other side a little bit more, I put the bust together again just to make sure that all the loops and pins are lining up properly and it has the same amount of curve and the same areas here, and it seems to be lining up a little bit better. The bottom on the loop side looks like it could be curved a little bit more right here, because I can see that there's just a tiniest little bit amount of space right here where I can, you see, I can kind of press it down. The bust kind of goes ring. So yeah, I can probably curve the loop side a little bit more there. And so I'm just going to continue with this. So now you have a pretty noticeable curve on the loop side as well as the pin side here. So once again, putting the two sides together and making sure that there are no problems with the busk's brackets matching up. And you can see that the curve actually looks pretty nice. It's a little bit subtle, but that's all I personally need because I don't really have any sort of lower tummy pooch, and I don't want that to be too exaggerated on me. Otherwise, I might end up looking a little bit thicker than I really am. But for those of you who do have some lower tummy pooch, curving the bust like this, it helps the corset to kind of cradle a little bit more of the bottom of a protruding abdomen. And that can sometimes help fight the gravity that wants to pull your tummy out from underneath your corset. So if you have even a long line, but a flat fronted corset, and you just can't get your lower tummy to stay inside, it just keeps on kind of sliding out from underneath, try curving your bust this way, because it might just, it's kind of like having little hands that cup your lower tummy and help keep it in. And now if you need a little bit more cradling at the very, very bottom here, and unfortunately, I don't have a corset that is like super long below the lowest bracket, but in some corsets you might see that. Like in this corset, I think you have about 1/2 inch you know, from the lowest bracket to the end of the bone. But there are some corsets where you have like an inch or like an inch and a half, and you might be able to curve that lowest tip there. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to really demonstrate using this corset. But I hope you can just understand what I'm describing here. So if you need a little bit more cradling there of your lower tummy, or if you have a corset that is very conspicuous at the very bottom here, like it has a distracting point kind of poking out at your pubic region that sticks out from under your clothes or something, this can definitely help with that. But also understand that it's a lot easier to hide the bottom edge of a corset if you're starting one that's cut straight across or gently curved. If you have something that is pointed or has some sort of really dramatic contouring to the bottom, that is obviously going to be a lot more difficult to hide. So the softer the edge here, and the less of a point that you have, the easier it's, you know, that little kind of pelvic protrusion that the corset sometimes gives under clothing. It's just easier to hide if you're starting with the right cut of corset in the first place. But just a note about different body types here. If you have a very low body fat percentage or a naturally very flat lower tummy, curving in the bottom edge of the busk too much here can cause that bottom tip of the bone to jab into your pubic mound or your pelvic bone uncomfortably. So be careful here and curve a little bit less as opposed to more here until you get a comfortable compromise. So now let's move on to the next curve, which is creating a dish in the waist. So let's say you saw my video on corset profiles and you really like the look of the corsets that have a curve in the waist. When you turn to the profile, it's curved inwardly right at the waistline. It creates that sort of dished look. You don't like the look of the flat-fronted corset, so you find that you look too thick in them or something. So this next curve is going to show you how to create that gentle concave curve right at the waist tape usually. So locate the waist tape and make sure that the waist tape is where your natural waist is as well, because that can help. So we're going to be concentrating most of the curve right here in between those two pins. And again, on the other side, matching up, make sure when you're curving the other side between those two loops. Same technique as before, except you're curving it in the other direction. So you can put your thumbs there to support the pins if you want to, and make sure that you're curving in between those two spots like I just said. And just a note, when you have a corset with a modesty placket like this, sometimes it'll go like weird like that and you go, oh no, like my busk is doing weird things. But no, your bone is fine. It's probably just the modesty placket that has a mind of its own. So yeah, keep an eye on that. So I'm showing you the loop side here because I think you can see it a little bit more clearly on this side. So you can obviously see the convex curve that we already put in the lower tummy, and right there a very, very subtle little concave curve right at the waistline there. And I would not start with anything more than that. Again, try on the corset, see if it's comfortable for you. Only if you need more than this can you bend it a little bit more, but I would absolutely not start with anything more than that. And for some people, that might even be a tiny bit too much, who knows. So it really depends on your own comfort and your aesthetic preferences. Remember in my last video I mentioned that too much of a curve at the waistline here might cause you to bend forward. It can give you a forward leaning posture. So make sure that when you try on your corset, this inward curve does not affect your posture in a bad way. And also make sure that you can breathe completely comfortably and it's not putting any uncomfortable pressure on your diaphragm. Also keep in mind that the more dished a corset is at the waistline, the more it can kick out the bottom edge here. So if you make this curve more dramatic, logically this part is going to move forward a little bit and you might have to curve this part inward a little bit more just to prevent that pelvic region from sticking out again. Now the fourth and last type of bust curve we're going to discuss is flipping out the sternum here a little bit. So some corsetiers will sew a tiny little pillow or a cushion right here at the top of the busk on the inside to make it more comfortable at the sternum for its wearer. One example is Création La Scarpelette. They are now a defunct company, but they used to do something like that. But if you find that your corset, the busk kind of ends at a weird height for you, it might be too long and it's kind of poking into your the actual bone of your sternum, or it's competing with the gore of your bra, or if your busk is a little bit too low and it's kind of ending on your solar plexus and putting weird uncomfortable pressure on your diaphragm or something, you might want to curve this outward so that it's not touching that part of your body, or not putting as much pressure on there. You know, mine is about that much. It would be kind of hard to bend without tweezers, and in that situation it might actually cause like a. So if your corset, the busk is a little bit longer from the pin to the very top edge, you can try curving out that top edge a little bit. What I might do in a situation like this is maybe start from here instead and curve it ever so slightly out, and it really does not have to be a dramatic bend at all, just a tiny little bit to move it like a centimeter or half a centimeter away, that top edge away from your body, and that's really all that is necessary for it to take pressure off of your sternum. So you can mix and match any of these bust curves depending on your body type and what kind of support you need, your aesthetic preferences, and your personal comfort level. And if you apply all of the curves to the same corset as I did here, as best as I could, it will end up looking slightly like an S shape in the side, in the profile view. So again, I don't know how many times I've said it in this video, just bend it a little bit at a time. Keep trying it on after every change you make, just to make sure that you are liking the changes and you're finding them comfortable and supportive. Obviously, you don't want to end up overdoing all of these and end up giving yourself like worse posture or less comfort or support than you had in the beginning. So on the left is the before and on the right is the after. So if you don't like the way that it looks with the busk bent, that's totally fine. It's a completely subjective thing. You do you, and keep your busks perfectly straight if you want it that way. And for the rest of you who might want to try bending your busk or curving it in some way for better support or a more flattering profile in your subjective opinion, then try out these tips. Do let me know if you have any questions, and if any of you have other tips for curving your busk, leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!